Dogs can't tell you when something's wrong at home, but they show you in ways that only someone who truly understands animal behavior would recognize. For 6 years, she'd seen the signs: pets that flinched at sudden movements, children who seemed afraid to make noise, and bruises that were explained away with stories that didn't quite make sense. Welcome to Silent Heroes. Before we begin this powerful story of protection found in unexpected places, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. Sarah Mitchell had been running Paws and Peace dog walking service throughout the affluent Riverside Hills neighborhood for 6 years, caring for beloved family pets while their owners worked demanding professional jobs that kept them away from home for 10 to 12 hours daily. Her client base included judges, corporate executives, and medical professionals who trusted her with their house keys, alarm codes, and most importantly, the well-being of animals they considered family members. At 43, Sarah had built a reputation as the most reliable and caring dog walker in the area, known for her intuitive understanding of animal behavior, her detailed daily reports about each pet's activities and mood, and her ability to provide personalized care that kept both pets and owners completely satisfied with her services. Sarah's daily routine included visits to 15 different homes throughout the neighborhood, spending quality time with dogs that ranged from energetic puppies requiring extensive exercise to senior pets needing gentle care and medical attention. Each visit was carefully scheduled to ensure that every animal received individualized attention while maintaining the structured routine that kept pets happy and healthy during their owners' long work days. The affluent neighborhood provided Sarah with steady income while allowing her to work with animals she genuinely loved in beautiful homes where families clearly valued their pets as important members of their households. The work was peaceful, rewarding, and exactly the kind of positive environment Sarah had been seeking after leaving her previous career under circumstances that had left her emotionally exhausted and questioning her ability to help people who needed protection. Her clients included successful families who treated their pets with genuine affection and provided veterinary care, premium food, and comfortable living conditions that demonstrated real commitment to animal welfare. Sarah's work involved more than just exercise. She provided companionship, basic training reinforcement, and the kind of individualized attention that kept pets mentally and physically healthy. But Sarah Mitchell wasn't just a dog walker caring for neighborhood pets. She was former licensed clinical social worker Sarah Mitchell, with 12 years of experience in child protection services that had made her one of the region's leading experts in recognizing signs of domestic violence, child abuse, and family trauma that often remained hidden from outside observation. Sarah's social work career had specialized in cases involving families where abuse was suspected but difficult to prove, requiring her to develop expertise in reading behavioral indicators that children and vulnerable adults displayed when they were experiencing trauma but couldn't or wouldn't report their situations to authorities who might be able to help them. During her child protection years, Sarah had investigated hundreds of reports involving suspected domestic violence and child abuse, working with law enforcement agencies to build cases against adults who were harming family members while maintaining public facades that concealed their criminal behavior from neighbors, colleagues, and community members who had no idea what was happening behind closed doors. Sarah's specialized training included advanced coursework in trauma recognition, family dynamics assessment, interview techniques for children who had experienced abuse, and the behavioral patterns that indicated when homes were dangerous for children and other vulnerable family members who depended on adults for their safety and well-being. Sarah's social work career had ended with voluntary resignation following a case involving an 8-year-old child who had died while under protective services supervision, despite Sarah's repeated recommendations for immediate removal from a household where both parents had extensive histories of violence and substance abuse that created ongoing danger for their children. The bureaucratic failures that had prevented Sarah from saving that child's life had convinced her that institutional child protection systems were sometimes too slow, too focused on family preservation rather than child safety, and too constrained by legal procedures that prioritized parental rights over immediate protection of children who were in imminent danger. The tragedy had destroyed Sarah's faith in the system. She devoted her career to protecting vulnerable people and convinced her that individual action by trained professionals might be more effective than institutional responses that were often compromised by politics, budget constraints, and legal complications that delayed intervention until it was too late to prevent serious harm. The transition from investigating child abuse to walking dogs had been perfect therapy for someone who'd spent 12 years witnessing family violence and institutional failures that sometimes cost innocent children their lives. Instead of documenting trauma and building legal cases against abusive parents, Sarah was caring for beloved pets in homes where families appeared to value kindness, responsibility, and the well-being of vulnerable creatures who depended on them for protection. For 6 years, Sarah had deliberately avoided analyzing her clients' family dynamics for signs of abuse or neglect that would have been crucial evidence during her social work career. She developed professional blindness to warning signals that might indicate family members were experiencing trauma, focusing exclusively on animal care rather than the human welfare concerns that had once consumed her professional life. Sarah had trained herself to see only happy pets, loving families, and the kind of households where animals were treated with respect and genuine affection rather than the behavioral indicators that might suggest children or adults were living in dangerous situations that required immediate intervention from trained professionals. Her client interactions were designed to be purely professional and animal-focused, avoiding the kind of personal observations or family assessments that might remind her of the investigative work she'd left behind. Sarah's relationship with pet owners was built around animal care, scheduling coordination, and service quality rather than the protective scrutiny that had been necessary during her child protection career. The peaceful routine of daily dog walks had provided exactly the kind of healing that Sarah needed after 12 years of confronting human cruelty and systemic failures that had left her emotionally exhausted and questioning whether her efforts to protect vulnerable people had made any meaningful difference in preventing family violence. But this Thursday morning was different. This Thursday morning, Sarah arrived at the Patterson family home for her regular visit with Charlie, their 3-year-old golden retriever, and immediately noticed behavioral changes in both the dog and the household environment that triggered every protective instinct that had been trained into her during 12 years of child protection work. Charlie, who was normally enthusiastic and eager for his daily walk, was cowering in the corner of the kitchen, displaying the kind of fearful behavior that indicated recent exposure to violence or loud, threatening sounds that had traumatized him. The dog's body language suggested hypervigilance and anxiety that went far beyond normal separation anxiety or temporary stress. More concerning, Sarah observed that the kitchen showed signs of recent conflict, a broken dish that had been hastily cleaned up, furniture that appeared to have been moved or knocked over, and the kind of environmental indicators that experienced social workers learned to recognize as evidence of domestic violence incidents. As Sarah attempted to comfort Charlie and prepare him for his walk, she heard sounds from upstairs that confirmed her worst suspicions about what had occurred in the Patterson household. A woman's voice was speaking in the soothing, apologetic tones that Sarah recognized from hundreds of domestic violence cases, the voice of someone trying to calm a child who had witnessed traumatic events that adults were trying to minimize or explain away. "It's okay, sweetie," the voice said. "Daddy was just upset about work. He didn't mean to break the plate. These things happen sometimes when grown-ups are stressed." Sarah recognized the language patterns immediately, an adult attempting to normalize violence for a child who had witnessed domestic abuse, using explanations that were designed to prevent the child from understanding that what they had experienced was criminal behavior rather than normal family conflict. When Mrs. Patterson came downstairs to greet Sarah, her appearance confirmed the suspicions that Charlie's behavior and the environmental evidence had already suggested. Despite careful makeup application, Sarah could see facial bruising that indicated recent physical violence, and Mrs. Patterson's movement patterns suggested she was experiencing pain from injuries that weren't visible. Most significantly, Mrs. Patterson's interaction with Charlie revealed the kind of gentle, protective behavior that Sarah had observed in domestic violence victims who were trying to shield their pets and children from ongoing abuse while maintaining the appearance of normal family life for outside observers. "Charlie's been a little nervous lately," Mrs. Patterson explained, avoiding eye contact while speaking in the careful, measured tones that indicated she was choosing her words to avoid revealing information that might prompt unwanted questions. "My husband has been working late, and you know how dogs can be sensitive to changes in routine." Sarah understood that she was being given a carefully constructed explanation that was designed to account for observable evidence while concealing the reality of domestic violence that was affecting both the family dog and other household members who couldn't protect themselves from an abusive adult. But Sarah also realized that her peaceful dog walking career was about to become a child protection case that would force her to choose between the quiet animal care business she'd built and returning to the world of family violence intervention that she tried to leave behind permanently. Sarah continued her normal routine with Charlie while her trained instincts automatically cataloged additional evidence that confirmed her suspicions about the domestic violence situation in the Patterson household. The dog's behavior during their walk revealed trauma patterns that indicated ongoing exposure to household violence rather than isolated incidents. Charlie was hypervigilant during their walk, constantly scanning for potential threats and displaying startled responses to normal neighborhood sounds like car doors closing or children playing. This level of anxiety in a previously confident dog suggested chronic exposure to unpredictable violence that had created lasting behavioral changes. When they returned to the house, Sarah observed 7-year-old Emma Patterson through the kitchen window and immediately recognized behavioral indicators that confirmed domestic violence was affecting the entire family. Emma was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework with the kind of rigid posture and fearful concentration that belonged to children who were trying to avoid attracting negative attention from dangerous adults. Emma's interaction with her mother revealed additional concerning dynamics. The child was monitoring her mother's facial expressions and body language with the hypervigilance that Sarah had observed in hundreds of children who were living in households where adult behavior was unpredictable and potentially violent. Most significantly, Emma flinched when her father's voice could be heard from another room, displaying the kind of fear response that indicated she had experienced or witnessed violence from him and was constantly prepared for potential threats to her safety or her mother's well-being. Sarah realized that her observations were documenting a classic domestic violence situation where an abusive husband was terrorizing both his wife and child while maintaining a professional reputation that concealed his criminal behavior from colleagues and community members who had no idea what was happening in the Patterson household. During her final minutes at the house, Sarah gathered additional evidence that confirmed the scope and severity of the abuse situation. Mrs. Patterson's careful movements suggested she was hiding physical injuries, and her nervous monitoring of her husband's location indicated she was living in constant fear of his unpredictable violence. Emma's homework behavior provided crucial intelligence about how domestic violence was affecting her development and safety. The child was working with the kind of perfectionistic anxiety that suggested she believed academic mistakes might trigger violence, and her constant monitoring of adult conversations indicated she was assuming responsibility for managing dangerous family dynamics that were far beyond her ability to control. Sarah understood that she was witnessing a high-risk domestic violence situation where both the mother and child were in immediate danger from an abuser who had escalated to the point where normal interventions might actually increase the risk of lethal violence. Sarah faced a decision that would determine whether Emma and her mother received the protection they needed or continued experiencing escalating abuse that could result in serious injury or death. She could contact Child Protective Services through official channels and hope that institutional procedures would provide intervention before the situation deteriorated further, or she could take direct action based on her training and experience with cases where victims' safety couldn't wait for bureaucratic responses. Sarah made a decision that would save 2 lives while potentially ending her peaceful retirement from child protection work. Instead of following institutional procedures that might take days or weeks to provide effective intervention, Sarah would use her training and community connections to ensure immediate safety for both victims while building a case that would protect them from further violence. Mrs. Patterson, Sarah said while maintaining her normal dog walking routine to avoid creating suspicion, I want you to know that if you or Emma ever need help with anything at all, I have experience with situations where families need support and resources that aren't always easy to find. Mrs. Patterson's response confirmed that she understood the significance of Sarah's offer. Her eyes filled with tears as she whispered, I don't know how to keep her safe anymore. He's getting worse, and I'm afraid of what might happen if I try to leave. Sarah activated protocols she hadn't used since her social work retirement, contacting specialized domestic violence units and child protection teams that were trained to handle emergency extractions from high lethality abuse situations. Her credentials and experience provided immediate access to resources that could ensure both victims' safety while building criminal cases against abusive adults. Detective Rodriguez, this is Sarah Mitchell, former CPS investigator. I have a high lethality domestic violence situation involving a 7-year-old child and her mother. Immediate safety planning required before situation escalates to potential homicide. The response from Detective Rodriguez was immediate and professional. Sarah, we remember your work with our joint task force. What's the current situation and what resources do the victims need for immediate safety? Sarah provided detailed assessment of the Patterson family situation, including her observations of injury patterns, behavioral indicators, and environmental evidence that suggested Mr. Patterson was escalating toward potentially lethal violence against both his wife and daughter. Rodriguez, this fits the high lethality profile we've discussed in training: escalating frequency, increasing severity, victim isolation, and perpetrator control behaviors that suggest imminent risk of serious harm. The child is showing trauma symptoms consistent with ongoing exposure to domestic violence. Detective Rodriguez confirmed that Sarah's assessment matched intelligence that law enforcement had been developing about Mr. Patterson through reports from colleagues who had observed concerning behavior changes and aggressive incidents that had raised questions about his stability and potential for violence. Sarah, we've been receiving reports about Patterson's behavior at his law firm, anger management issues, threatening statements about his family, and concerning comments about control and ownership that suggest domestic violence escalation. Your intelligence provides the missing pieces we need for immediate intervention. Sarah coordinated with domestic violence specialists who were experienced in conducting emergency safety planning for victims whose situations required immediate extraction from dangerous households while ensuring that intervention procedures wouldn't trigger retaliatory violence from abusers who might respond violently to loss of control over their victims. The safety planning process required careful coordination between multiple agencies while maintaining operational security that would prevent Mr. Patterson from learning about intervention efforts that could trigger escalated violence if he discovered that outside agencies were aware of his abusive behavior. Mrs. Patterson, Sarah explained during a carefully planned conversation that appeared to be routine dog walking business, there are people who specialize in helping families transition to safety when home situations become dangerous. Would you be interested in learning about resources that could help you and Emma? Mrs. Patterson's response revealed both desperate hope and realistic fear about the dangers involved in seeking help from domestic violence services. I want to protect Emma, but he's threatened to kill both of us if I ever try to leave or if anyone finds out what's been happening. He knows people in law enforcement, and he's convinced me that no one would believe me if I reported him. Sarah understood that Mrs. Patterson was describing the isolation and intimidation tactics that abusers use to prevent victims from seeking help while maintaining control through threats that were designed to convince victims that escape was impossible and that seeking help would result in increased danger. But Sarah also understood that Mr. Patterson's threats were exactly the kind of terroristic behavior that domestic violence specialists were trained to address through safety planning that could protect victims while building criminal cases that would ensure abusers faced appropriate consequences for their crimes. Over the next week, while maintaining her normal dog walking routine to avoid alerting Mr. Patterson to outside intervention, Sarah coordinated with specialized teams who were developing comprehensive safety plans for both Mrs. Patterson and Emma that would address immediate protection needs while building long-term solutions that would allow them to rebuild their lives without fear of continued violence. The intervention required careful timing to ensure that both victims could be extracted from the dangerous household while Mr. Patterson was away from home and unable to interfere with safety procedures or retaliate against family members who were seeking protection from his abusive behavior. Sarah's role in the intervention was to provide detailed intelligence about household routines, Mr. Patterson's schedule patterns, and environmental factors that would affect the safety and success of emergency extraction procedures that needed to be executed without alerting the abuser to official intervention until both victims were safely relocated to secure facilities. Detective Rodriguez, target leaves for work every morning at 7:15 a.m. and doesn't return until after 6 p.m. Emma is at school from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Optimal extraction window is 8:30 to 2:30 when only the mother is in the house and neighbors are away at work. The extraction planning also included coordination with school officials who would need to ensure Emma's safety during the transition period while avoiding creating suspicion that might alert Mr. Patterson to intervention efforts before both victims were safely relocated. Sarah realized that her 6 years of peaceful dog walking were about to end with the most important child protection case of her career, one that had come to her through animal behavior observations rather than official reports, and one that would require all of her professional expertise to ensure successful outcomes for victims who deserved safety and protection from continued violence. 3 days later, while Mr. Patterson was in court presenting a case that would ironically involve protecting a client's rights, specialized domestic violence teams executed a carefully coordinated extraction that removed both Mrs. Patterson and Emma from their home and transported them to a secure shelter facility where they could receive medical attention, counseling services, and legal protection from further violence. Sarah's detailed intelligence about household routines and environmental factors had enabled law enforcement to conduct the extraction without alerting Mr. Patterson to official intervention until both victims were safely relocated and protection orders were in place to prevent him from locating or contacting them. The evidence that Sarah had gathered through her dog walking observations became crucial documentation for criminal charges including domestic violence, child endangerment, and terrorist threats that would result in Mr. Patterson's arrest when he returned home to discover that his victims had escaped with help from law enforcement agencies that now possessed detailed evidence of his crimes. Mrs. Patterson's medical examination revealed injuries consistent with ongoing physical abuse, while Emma's psychological evaluation documented trauma symptoms that confirmed chronic exposure to domestic violence that had been affecting her development and sense of safety throughout her young life. Charlie, the golden retriever whose behavioral changes had first alerted Sarah to the abuse situation, was temporarily relocated to Sarah's home where he could receive specialized care for trauma recovery while legal proceedings determined long-term custody arrangements that would ensure his continued safety and well-being. 6 months later, Emma was thriving in a new school district where she could develop normal friendships without fear of her father's violence, while Mrs. Patterson was rebuilding her career with support from victim services programs that provided job training, legal advocacy, and therapeutic services designed to help domestic violence survivors establish independent lives. Mr. Patterson was convicted on multiple charges including domestic violence, child abuse, and criminal threats, receiving a 12-year prison sentence that would ensure both victims' safety while providing them with time to establish permanent security measures that would protect them after his eventual release. Sarah's intervention had demonstrated how community professionals with specialized training could serve as early warning systems for families experiencing domestic violence that traditional reporting systems might not detect quickly enough to prevent serious harm or death. 3 months after the successful extraction, Sarah received a request from the County Domestic Violence Coalition to train other service providers who had regular access to homes, house cleaners, repair technicians, healthcare workers, and pet service providers to recognize signs of domestic violence and coordinate with specialized law enforcement teams when families needed immediate protection. Sarah accepted the position, understanding that her experience demonstrated how civilian professionals could identify dangerous family situations that victims couldn't report safely while coordinating with experts who could provide effective intervention without increasing risks to vulnerable family members. Sarah's dog walking business became the foundation for a community protection program that taught service providers to recognize behavioral indicators of domestic violence while providing them with protocols for reporting concerns to specialized teams that could respond appropriately to protect victims and hold abusers accountable for their crimes. The program that began with Charlie's fearful behavior expanded to include training for dozens of community professionals who learned to identify situations where families needed help while coordinating with resources that could provide effective protection for victims who couldn't seek help through traditional channels. Emma and her mother continued to benefit from victim services that helped them process their trauma while building new lives based on safety, stability, and the kind of family relationships that were free from fear and violence. Emma also became an advocate for other children experiencing abuse, sharing her story to help other young victims understand that adult violence was never their fault and that help was available for families who needed protection. Sarah's transition from child protection work to dog walking had come full circle, but with a deeper understanding that protecting vulnerable people wasn't just a professional responsibility. It was a community obligation that required every adult to be prepared to recognize danger signals and take appropriate action when families needed help. 6 years after leaving institutional social work, Sarah had discovered that her most important case would come to her through animal behavior rather than official reports, and that her expertise could save lives when applied by someone who was willing to act immediately rather than waiting for bureaucratic procedures to provide protection that might come too late. The Patterson family's rescue demonstrated that domestic violence intervention happened most effectively when trained professionals were embedded in community settings where victims felt safe enough to reveal their situations indirectly through environmental changes that informed observers could recognize as calls for help. Charlie's behavioral changes had been the first signal that his family needed protection, proving that sometimes the most vulnerable members of households, whether they were children, adults, or animals, could communicate danger in ways that trained professionals could recognize and respond to with life-saving intervention. So now I ask you, have you ever noticed concerning changes in the behavior of pets or children? Have you met someone whose professional background prepared them to recognize when families needed protection? Share their story in the comments, because quiet guardians like Sarah deserve to be remembered. And if this story moved you, subscribe to Silent Heroes. We're here to honor the people who understand that protecting the vulnerable is everyone's responsibility, and that real heroism happens when someone chooses to act when lives depend on their courage. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the person walking dogs in your neighborhood has spent years learning to recognize when families need protection. And sometimes that expertise saves lives that might otherwise be lost to violence that happens behind the most beautiful doors.